Sweat and blood still clung damp on her shirt when a roar thundered across the training field, drowning out the blare of the drill siren. "You think that trident is some kind of fashion tattoo?" Sergeant Blake growled, jabbing a finger at the back of the petite Asian-American veteran. "SEALs don't recruit mascots. You're in the wrong place." Derisive laughter burst out from behind. Mia Nguyen said nothing. She stood tall in the line of recruits, all waiting to see her break. But in the early morning sun at the Coronado base, where only survivors earned the right to have their names remembered, the trident inked across her back began to show, and everything was about to change. It was day 14 of the special training program at the SEAL base in Coronado, and veteran Mia Nguyen, the only woman in the group, had quickly become Staff Sergeant Blake's favorite target. "Stand straight when I'm talking to you, honorary SEAL." Blake's voice boomed across the training yard like the crack of an M16. His solid frame cast a shadow over the petite woman, making her seem like a trainee in the wrong place. Mia stood motionless, eyes forward, shoulders square, exactly as the manual prescribed, but she didn't return the mocking stare pressing down on her like bricks. 23 other trainees avoided meeting each other's eyes. They'd already learned that silence was a form of survival. When Blake found a new target, the rest got to rest. A few allowed themselves subtle smiles, taking quiet satisfaction in not being the one singled out today. Mia was different. She wasn't a recruit. She wasn't a reserve. She had been placed in the internal special training program to assist in tactical and psychological simulations. On paper, she stood on equal footing with the instructors. In practice, under the eyes of those who had never seen her name in a classified report, Mia was just a small woman with an outdated tattoo. That tattoo, the trident, the most prestigious emblem of the Navy SEALs, had shown faintly through her wet shirt when she stepped out of the pool that morning. One trainee had whispered, "She stick a sticker on her back?" Another replied, "Looks like a cereal box prize." Laughter spread like an oil slick through the steam-filled locker room. Mia said nothing. She simply bent down, wiped her sweat, and went on changing her shoes. Not a word. No reaction. Some mistook that silence for weakness. But they hadn't seen Mia back in Somalia when the rest of her unit had withdrawn, and she stayed behind to reset traps, blocking terrorist forces for 3 hours with no radio, no reinforcements. They didn't know that when she was awarded the trident, it wasn't for her scores, but because she had upheld the oath when no one else had the strength left to remember it. A left shoulder injury had taken her out of the front line, but it hadn't taken her trident. And yet here, at the Coronado base, a place she had once passed through quietly years before Mia was nameless. To those around her, she was just an Asian woman with worn-out shoes and a slow gait. No one thought she had once led a SEAL team in covert operations across the Mediterranean. No one remembered. And Mia didn't need them to. The only reason she kept the trident tattoo, knowing it would be met with doubt, was because it wasn't for showing off. It was to remind herself each morning she was still alive, still on mission. In the military, honor doesn't always come with an explanation, and she accepted that. The assembly whistle shrieked. Today's drill would be an emergency underwater training. Blake tossed his cap on the table, barked orders into his radio, and commanded everyone to head to the training area. But when his eyes swept over Mia, they stopped for half a second, long enough for anyone observant to notice. He knew. He had seen the tattoo, and he was thinking something. Had Blake realized who was really standing in front of him? Or was this just the beginning? The days at Coronado passed like a calm sea steady, seemingly unchanged, yet with an undercurrent few noticed. Mia blended into the rhythm of the base like a shadow. She never appeared at group meals. She didn't join in the banter after training hours. When the cluster of recruits lingered after a session, laughing over new challenges and dunking games in the pool, Mia was already gone, usually back to the western barracks where she lived apart, close to the sea. She guarded that space the same way she guarded her old memories. Quiet, orderly, and untouchable. Some called it eccentric. In truth, it was a kind of silent survival. Each morning, before dawn and before the mist lifted from the sand, Mia was awake. She ran along the shoreline alone, no headphones, no GPS, just steady, quiet steps, as if chasing some figure from the past. Maybe real, maybe an illusion. No one knew much about her, apart from a few scattered details that veteran officers had once heard. That Mia had been a team leader in coastal surveillance operations. That she had taken part in multiple pirate-chasing missions in the Gulf of Aden. But it all stopped at once heard. No one knew specifics. No one asked. And Mia had never told. Only once did Training Sergeant Davis, who had served in Iraq, catch her refastening a rookie's life belt without anyone noticing. The move was quick, neat, and more than anything unnervingly proficient. Davis frowned, and after that session quietly tried to check her military file, but part of Mia's record was classified. She's the kind of person that, when her file's sealed, you'd better start showing some respect, Davis muttered, half joking, half serious. Then came a Friday afternoon, when the wind picked up unexpectedly. The underwater survival test was postponed due to a filtration system failure. The recruits gathered behind the mess hall, chatting, sipping energy drinks, and trading stories of their weeks surviving Blake. The air seemed lighter, less tense. A young recruit with light brown hair asked, "So how'd that woman get a trident? Anyone verify it?" The guy next to him shrugged. "Probably fake. Looks like a sticker. A female SEAL sounds sketchy as hell." Another chimed in. "Maybe someone's ex-wife, just for show." Laughter erupted just as Mia walked past, silent as always. But this time, the wind blew against her, pressing her shirt tight to her back. And the trident tattoo appeared, clear and vivid beyond any rumor. A faded tattoo, unflashy, yet cut deep into her skin as if burned in by fire. No one spoke for several seconds. That silence carried a strange weight, unlike the cheap jokes from moments earlier. Those who have truly survived rarely speak of what they've been through. The truth was, Mia had once commanded a fast response boat that was ambushed by armed pirates. In the panic, the engine failed. Amid gunfire and heavy seas, she stayed calm, pulling 3 wounded into the cabin, using her own body to shield them for nearly 45 minutes with nothing but auxiliary oxygen and an almost inhuman focus. When the rescue helicopter arrived, she was the last to leave the vessel, after tying everyone down with emergency rope so no one would be thrown into the air mid-hoist. She never told that story. But she always kept a small pen in her coverall pocket, engraved with the names of the 3 who lived. They called her the calmest in chaos. But after receiving the trident, she withdrew from every spotlight. Not for glory, not from pain, but because she understood, hero isn't a role you can wear for life. Today, in peacetime, with a new generation entering the military full of eagerness and a touch of untested pride, Mia was like a story people tried to forget, not because it wasn't worth remembering, but because it made them feel small. Yet perhaps it was time that story was seen again, not through files, but through the quiet things she still did every day. What do you think someone with an honor tattoo they never flaunt is hiding? Take a moment, drop a 1 or "I'm still here" in the comments, and keep listening. It was a Wednesday morning with nothing to suggest it would be any different. The sky was gloomier than usual. Sea mist clung in a thin layer to the windshield of the Humvees lined up in front of the training yard. Mia arrived early, as she always did. She sat alone in the locker room, methodically checking each buckle of the life-saving harness on her training vest. She worked slowly, precisely, without hurry. There was something ritualistic about those movements, as if once everything was fastened properly, she could step outside without falling apart. Outside, the recruits were assembling. There were footsteps, shouted orders. The whistle blew to signal the start of the day, no need to ask if anyone was ready. The locker room door swung open. A man stepped in, moving with calm, tall, square-jawed, his hair the dry silver of sea salt. No uniform was needed to know. He had been a SEAL, and he still carried it in his posture. It was Captain Eli Blake, a living legend, the SEAL commander in many infamous operations in Syria and North Africa. He appeared rarely, but every appearance made people straighten their stance. Younger officers spoke his name in hushed tones as a kind of litmus test. If someone reacted, they had been to war. Blake headed straight to the lockers, intending to grab a helmet for the upcoming tactical drill review. But when his eyes swept the room, they stopped. They stopped exactly on her. Mia was standing with her back turned, pulling on an outer layer. The trident tattoo showed faintly through the thin fabric, like a whisper from the past. In the dim light, the ink was faded yet still clean and sharp. No embellishments, no gold edging, no flourish, just the original emblem. 3 prongs crossing, carrying the mark of someone who had earned it in silence and pain. Blake stood still. The room, despite the noise outside, seemed to go silent. He didn't speak. She didn't turn around. But between them, something was acknowledged. A kind of understanding only those who have nearly died can share. A recognition that needed no words. He looked for one more second. Then he gave a slight nod, not clear if it was a greeting, respect, or a thank you from someone who had once survived because of someone like her. And then he walked away, as if nothing unusual had happened. But everything had changed. A recruit standing outside the door happened to catch Blake's glance toward Mia. He said nothing. But he didn't joke anymore either. One look from someone like Blake was enough to silence an entire unit. From that day, no one asked further about Mia's tattoo. Not because they had been told not to, but because they understood. If a legend like Captain Blake paused before a woman with an old, worn tattoo, she was someone worth pausing for. That same day, the combat simulation assignment list was updated. Mia was designated as lead instructor for the emergency dive drill something. Until then, reserved only for active duty officers. She didn't ask for it. She didn't refuse. She simply did it. And did it precisely, like always. Over a meal after training, a young sergeant quietly Googled Trident SEAL plus women plus Coronado. There weren't many results, but he found an old, obscure news piece with no clear names about a woman who had been awarded commendation after a transport ship defense mission with an image of a trident tattooed in the exact same spot as Mia's. No one asked Mia about it, but from the next day they began greeting her more clearly, nodding as they passed, even asking her to adjust the straps on their tactical vests, something they used to compete to avoid having to ask that strange woman. Blake didn't return to the base in the days that followed. But the way he had looked at Mia, not with surprise but with deep recognition, left a small imprint the entire unit remembered. A single glance, a silent turning point. But for Mia, it wasn't just a look. It was something she hadn't received in all her years in peacetime. To be seen without being judged. Do you think a single look can change how an entire community treats you? Don't look away. Because after that glance, the most decisive moment is about to arrive. One day after Captain Blake left the base, the emergency simulation drill was launched just before noon, right when the sun hung high overhead, heating both the surface of the artificial pool and the nerves of the recruits to a boiling point. The simulated scenario was kept secret until the very last moment. In the exercise, a group of young soldiers would dive into a mock ship cabin flooded, without power, locked from the inside, and be forced to find their own way to survive under pressure and darkness within 3 minutes. A recruit named Ramirez, the one who had most often joked about Mia's trident tattoo, was chosen to go first. At the start, everything seemed to go according to plan. Ramirez dove in with a flashlight, backup breathing tube, and communication device. The observation room recorded steady breathing, movement in the correct direction. But just 45 seconds later, the monitor went black. Audio went dead. For a fleeting moment, no one reacted. Some thought it was part of the drill. But Captain Blake, watching from above, leaned forward. His brow furrowed. And then the red alarm blared. Simulated emergency had just become a real one. Ramirez was trapped. Comms had failed. Flashlight dead. Cabin sealed. Water pressure was rising fast because the military-grade simulation system had kicked into automatic realism mode. And inside was a rookie with no experience in knowing when fear was necessary and when calm was the only thing that could save him. The tech crew scrambled. An officer prepared to dive in but was still arguing over emergency breathing protocol. Mia didn't wait. No orders, no request for permission, no explanation. She walked straight to the pool, stripped off her outer layer, checked her harness with practiced precision, leaving only the old breathing mask, the same one she had kept from her operational days. She dove in. No guiding lights, no one following. Just the compact silhouette of someone who knew how to save a life in murky, distorted depths where every sound warps and every second could be the last. Mia approached the cabin from the left side where there was an auxiliary latch few noticed. She tapped 3 times on the cabin wall. A seal signal meaning, "I'm here, don't panic." Ramirez, caught between fear and despair, clung to the cold steel. When he felt Mia's hand tug lightly at his safety strap, he nearly collapsed with relief. Mia didn't speak. She simply handed him the spare breathing tube, then pointed toward the secondary escape hatch, one everyone else had overlooked. It took them exactly 63 seconds to reach the surface. When they broke water, Ramirez's gasping breaths merged with the stunned silence on shore. No one was ready for that moment. The entire base went still for a few seconds. From the highest point of the control deck, Captain Blake saw Mia tug off her mask, water dripping from her forehead, the trident tattoo clinging to her skin like a silent declaration. SEAL isn't a title, it's a survival reflex. Ramirez was hauled to shore, coughing but alive. As the medic led him to the rest station, he turned back to look at Mia, not with curiosity or disdain, but with the quiet gaze of someone who owed a life. Mia stayed for a few minutes, unhurried. By the edge of the training ground, she leaned against the wall, water still dripping from her hair down her collar. Captain Blake walked down slowly, his boots thudding lightly on the wet concrete. He didn't say a word, but their eyes met this time with no distance. He nodded. Not like a commander to a subordinate, but like an old comrade, a man who had once been left in the open sea, nodding to someone who had saved him without needing anyone to know. There was no applause, no formal commendation, but from that moment, every mocking laugh died for good. My dear listeners, stay tuned for the next part that will leave you in awe. Take a second to leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see people joining us from all over the world. The news spread like a wildfire igniting in a dry forest. No official bulletin, no one needing to speak aloud. By that same afternoon, nearly the entire platoon had heard the story. The veteran woman with the trident tattoo jumped in to save Ramirez. Alone. No orders. Within just a few hours, Mia's name was no longer spoken alongside laughter. The first to change his demeanor was Ramirez. He didn't say much. He simply waited until no one was looking, then walked over to Mia as she was retying climbing rope at the equipment shed. Mia didn't look at him, she didn't need to. But he stood there, shoulders slightly hunched, like a fresh recruit who just learned his first lesson, not about tactics but about gratitude. He spoke just one sentence, just loud enough for her to hear. "Sorry for underestimating you." Then he turned to leave. But before walking away, he gave a small nod. And for the first time, Mia returned it with a slight nod of her own, The faint smile on his face cut through the air at the base, an air once heavy with prejudice, making it easier to breathe. From that day on, Mia no longer sat alone at lunch. She didn't sit with the whole platoon. But if she chose a corner table, there would always be at least one or two soldiers who came over to ask her how to tie an emergency knot, how to orient underwater without GPS, or sometimes simply what she thought of the mess hall's beef stew. Once, a recruit even dared to joke. If you graded military food, you'd get kicked back to civilian life on the spot. The whole table laughed. Mia smiled too. A smile neither forced nor overly clear, more like a signal that she was no longer on the fringes. She was here not as someone reluctantly accepted, but as an essential piece that had once been forgotten. Instructor Davis, normally not one to show much emotion, unexpectedly proposed inviting Mia to lead an internal discussion on psychological responses in emergency situations. The proposal was approved in 5 minutes. That day's discussion? Not a single seat empty. And for the first time in the short history of this training program, someone took notes by hand, not because it was required. One thing Mia said that day was not the least bit doctrinal. She simply shared, "In my first battle, I thought I was going to die. But when I saw the smallest teammate in the squad glance at me shaking all over and still nod for me to move forward, I understood." That afternoon, the sun sank slowly over Coronado Beach. The kind of late light that never seems in a hurry, as if it too wanted to linger a little longer to witness something that had shifted here. Mia stood alone on the sand, the soles of her combat boots leaving deep impressions in the damp surface. Gentle waves washed up, lapping at the edges of her boots like a familiar hand. Overhead, streaks of gold and amber spilled across the water, setting everything aglow soft yet profound, like the way one remembers something that once hurt but is still cherished. No one called her. No one followed. It was just her, the sea, and an unnamed memory finding its place again. Mia lifted her hand to her back, to where the trident tattoo, once a target for ridicule, had now become a quiet reminder. She didn't touch it the way one might stroke a trophy. She simply rested her palm there, as if to confirm that it was still there. Not faded, not erased. And, most importantly, no longer misunderstood. She closed her eyes. The sea breeze filled her lungs deep, wide, and lighter than anything she had carried before. The trident symbol of those who dared to go where no one wanted to go was, for her, also something else. A marker for anyone who had been hurt, silenced, or deemed not enough. She hadn't returned to be praised. She had returned to exist with dignity. And now, that had been achieved not through a medal ceremony, not through a grand speech, but through a change in the way others saw her and the way she saw herself. Behind her, along the concrete path leading to the beach, came the sound of footsteps. Light, steady. A group of recruits, not entirely by accident but not entirely on purpose, stood at a distance. They didn't call her name, they simply watched. Then one of them, Ramirez, raised his hand to his forehead in a salute. There was no instructor there to mark them, no drill that required it. Just a spontaneous act, simple, straightforward, as if to say, "We understand now." One saluted, then a second, then the entire group, all facing her. Mia didn't return the salute, but she turned her head, the sunlight cutting across her eyes so that her smile became more visible, not exactly happiness, but that rare emotion that comes when someone once pushed to the margins is finally brought back into the circle, not because they proved themselves, but because the truth spoke for itself. The scene was never filmed. No photograph was taken. Yet everyone who witnessed it remembered, not because it was a grand gesture, but because it came from a quiet change within each person. At one corner of the training yard, the bulletin board that day had gained another small note, pinned next to the old letter. "If a tattoo could make me misjudge a person, then I need to relearn how to see people." No signature. None needed. A week later, Mia left the base. There was no formal send-off. But on the day she departed, the base's perimeter fence bore a small strip of black cloth tied neatly, accompanied by a hand-painted message. Fair winds and following seas. An Old Navy farewell, reserved for those who leave with the highest respect. The old pickup truck carrying Mia rolled out of Coronado in the early morning light, down the sandy road she had once turned into years ago, her shoulders then heavy with doubt. This time, she carried little. Just a backpack, a small box of keepsakes, and a leather-bound notebook engraved with 3 words. Earned, not given. On her back, the trident tattoo remained no longer something to hide, but a story worth telling truthfully. And perhaps one day, when the younger ones ask, "Who is Mia? No one," someone will answer not with grand words, but with a single complete sentence. She's the one who reminded us that honor doesn't need to be shouted, only lived. Do you believe that in an age of noise and spectacle, there's still room for someone who simply stands still and is remembered forever? In a world where noise and judgment are flung so easily, Mia's story reminds us that true worth doesn't lie in display, but in the way we live quietly, yet steadfastly. A tattoo once thought to be just ink on skin turns out to be a map leading back to dignity, memory, and recognition. And perhaps, somewhere out there, there is another Mia, someone being misjudged, misunderstood, simply because their appearance doesn't match expectations. If there's one thing we should take away from this story, it's this: learn to look deeper into a person. Thank you for walking with us to the end of this journey. If the story has touched you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, or tell us about a Mia in your life whom you want to honor. Subscribe so we can continue sharing stories that help us slow down, understand one another better, and live more humanely each day. Because there are scars that shouldn't be hidden, but seen with respect.